Sugar seems harmless. Today it sits quietly on kitchen tables, hidden inside drinks, desserts, and processed food. But there was a time when sugar was one of the most valuable commodities on Earth. Nations fought over it, fortunes were built on it, entire islands were transformed by it. And behind the enormous wealth generated by sugar stood one of the most brutal systems in human history. Our story begins in the Caribbean during the 17th century. At first glance, these islands looked like paradise. Warm tropical weather, fertile soil, and endless coastlines attracted European powers eager to expand their empires. Spain arrived first, but Britain, France, the Netherlands, and others soon followed. What they discovered was that the Caribbean possessed something incredibly valuable: perfect conditions for growing sugarcane. Sugarcane was not new. It had been cultivated for centuries in parts of Asia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean. But the Caribbean offered something different. Vast plantations could be established on a scale never seen before. As demand for sugar exploded across Europe, plantation owners realized they had found a path to extraordinary wealth. At the time, sugar was considered a luxury product. Wealthy families displayed it at banquets as a symbol of status. It sweetened tea, coffee, and chocolate, all of which were becoming increasingly popular. The more Europeans developed a taste for sugar, the more plantations expanded to satisfy demand. Soon, entire islands were being reshaped. Forests disappeared to make room for endless rows of sugarcane. Mills and processing facilities rose beside fields stretching toward the horizon. Ports became crowded with merchant ships waiting to carry valuable cargo across the Atlantic. Money poured into the Caribbean. Barbados became one of the richest colonies in the English Empire. Saint-Domingue, the French colony that would later become Haiti, generated staggering profits. By the 18th century, some Caribbean islands were producing wealth that rivaled much larger territories. But there was a problem. Sugar production required enormous amounts of labor. Growing sugarcane was difficult. Harvesting it was exhausting. Processing it had to happen quickly before the crop spoiled. Plantation owners wanted a workforce that could be controlled, expanded, and forced to operate under relentless conditions. Their solution became one of history's greatest tragedies. Millions of Africans were captured, sold, and transported across the Atlantic through the transatlantic slave trade. Ships packed with human beings crossed the ocean under horrifying conditions. Men, women, and children were chained below deck for weeks or months. Disease spread rapidly. Many never survived the journey. Yet those who did survive faced another nightmare upon arrival. On Caribbean plantations, enslaved people worked from sunrise to sunset under intense heat. Sugarcane leaves could slice exposed skin. The work was physically crushing. Injuries were common. Punishments were severe. Plantation owners viewed human lives through the lens of profit. The system became so brutal that in some colonies, the population of enslaved workers declined faster than it could naturally replace itself. Rather than improving conditions, plantation owners simply imported more people through the slave trade. As sugar profits increased, the machinery of exploitation expanded. A powerful economic network connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Manufactured goods traveled from Europe to Africa. Captive Africans were transported to the Caribbean and the Americas. Sugar, rum, and other products then flowed back to Europe. This triangular trade generated immense wealth for merchants, investors, shipbuilders, bankers, and governments. Entire cities benefited. Ports such as Liverpool, Bristol, Nantes, and Bordeaux became major centers of commerce. Elegant buildings, financial institutions, and commercial networks were built with money tied directly or indirectly to plantation economies. By the 18th century, sugar had become more than a food product. It was an engine powering global trade. The demand seemed endless. As European populations grew and consumer habits changed, sugar became increasingly affordable. What had once been a luxury for aristocrats slowly became available to ordinary people. Ironically, the more common sugar became, the more labor was required to produce it. Plantations expanded further. Competition between European powers intensified. Control of Caribbean islands became a strategic priority. Colonies changed hands through wars and treaties. Naval fleets crossed oceans to defend territories whose economic value rested largely on sugar production. The Caribbean had become one of the most contested regions in the world. Yet beneath the wealth and competition, resistance never disappeared. Enslaved people fought back in countless ways. Some sabotaged equipment, some escaped into remote regions. Others formed independent communities beyond colonial control. Rebellions erupted across multiple islands despite overwhelming risks. The most dramatic challenge emerged in Saint-Domingue. By the late 18th century, Saint-Domingue was the wealthiest colony in the French Empire. Its plantations generated enormous profits from sugar and coffee. To outsiders, it appeared extraordinarily successful. But the colony was built upon extreme inequality. Hundreds of thousands of enslaved people vastly outnumbered the ruling population. In 1791, that tension exploded. A massive uprising began. Plantations burned, colonial authority collapsed. What followed became one of the most significant revolutions in history. Leaders such as Toussaint Louverture emerged from the chaos. Formerly enslaved people organized armies and fought against powerful European forces determined to maintain control. The conflict lasted for years. France, Britain, and Spain all became involved. Against extraordinary odds, the revolutionaries prevailed. In 1804, Haiti declared independence, becoming the first nation in history established by a successful large-scale slave revolt. The shockwaves were enormous. Plantation owners across the Caribbean feared similar uprisings. Governments re-evaluated their policies. Debates about slavery intensified throughout the Atlantic world. The sugar empire that had seemed unstoppable was beginning to face new challenges. During the 19th century, abolitionist movements gained strength. Activists exposed the realities of plantation life. Formerly enslaved individuals shared their experiences. Public opinion gradually shifted in parts of Europe and North America. Britain abolished slavery throughout most of its empire in 1834. Other nations eventually followed. Yet the legacy of the sugar economy did not disappear. The wealth generated over centuries remained embedded in institutions, infrastructure, and global financial systems. The social consequences also endured. Many Caribbean societies continued to struggle with inequalities rooted in the plantation era. Land ownership patterns, economic structures, and political systems had all been shaped by centuries of colonial rule and forced labor. Even today, traces of that history remain visible across the region. Old plantation houses still stand, ruined sugar mills dot the landscape. Historic ports continue to tell stories of ships that once carried cargoes of sugar alongside human suffering. And perhaps the greatest irony is this: the product itself appears ordinary. A spoonful of sugar in a cup of tea reveals none of the vast networks, brutal labor systems, imperial rivalries, and human tragedies that made the industry possible. Yet for centuries, sugar helped shape the modern world. It transformed economies, fueled empires, enriched merchants, inspired revolutions, and altered the lives of millions of people across multiple continents. The Caribbean sugar empire generated extraordinary wealth, but that wealth came at an enormous human cost. And in the end, the same system that created immense fortunes also planted the seeds of resistance that would challenge and eventually reshape the Atlantic world forever.